At 0647 on June 6, 1944, Commander Samuel Dealey stood in the cramped conning tower of USS Harder, watching 3 Japanese destroyers slice through the moonlit waters off Tawi-Tawi, tracking his submarine with deadly precision. The 37-year-old Texan had already earned a reputation as one of the Pacific's most aggressive submarine commanders. 5 war patrols, 18 enemy ships destroyed. Now the Imperial Japanese Navy had dispatched Minazuki, Hayanami, and Tanikaze with explicit orders: eliminate the American submarine, terrorizing their supply lines. Until April 1944, American submarines avoided Japanese destroyers like the plague. The mathematics of survival were simple. A destroyer could make 35 knots, while a submerged submarine struggled to reach 9. Between Pearl Harbor and March 1944, Japanese destroyers had sent 14 American submarines to the bottom. Not a single American submarine had successfully sunk a Japanese destroyer in direct combat. Commander Dealey changed that equation forever. On April 13th, when destroyer Ikazuchi charged Harder's position at flank speed, every officer on the bridge expected Dealey to follow doctrine, dive deep and run silent. Instead, he ordered something that defied every manual: all ahead flank, right at him. At 900 yards, Harder fired 4 torpedoes in a spread pattern. 2 struck amidships. Ikazuchi exploded and sank in 5 minutes, taking 180 sailors to the bottom. Dealey's radio report became legendary throughout the Pacific Submarine Force. Expended 4 torpedoes and 1 Jap destroyer. Admiral Suemu Toyota, Commander-in-Chief of the Japanese Combined Fleet, didn't share the humor. Between January and May 1944, Japan had lost 23 destroyers, each loss disrupting carefully planned operations. Operation A-Go, the plan to annihilate the American invasion fleet at the Philippines, required precise coordination. Every destroyer lost to submarine attacks created gaps that couldn't be filled. By late May, Toyota had concentrated the mobile fleet at Tawi-Tawi anchorage in the southern Philippines. 4 battleships, including the mighty Yamato, 9 carriers, 15 cruisers, and 28 destroyers, the largest concentration of Japanese naval power since Midway. American codebreakers knew they were there. Admiral Charles Lockwood sent Harder to patrol the surrounding waters and attack targets of opportunity. For 9 days, Harder operated undetected, gathering intelligence on Japanese movements. Then, on June 6th at 0300, a Japanese patrol plane spotted Harder's periscope wake 15 miles north of Tawi-Tawi. 3 destroyers responded immediately, converging on the submarine's position in a coordinated attack pattern designed to box Harder into a kill zone. Commander Dealey studied the lead destroyer through his periscope. Minazuki, 2,500 tons, armed with 5 5-inch guns and depth-charge racks. She was closing fast, zigzagging to avoid torpedo attacks. Behind her, 2 more destroyers spread out in a search pattern, ready to pounce once Harder revealed her position. Dealey made a calculation that would have seemed insane to any other submarine commander. He swung Harder's bow directly at Minazuki. Range, 100 yards. Time to collision, 96 seconds. Every man in Harder's conning tower understood what down the throat meant. Fire torpedoes straight at an attacking destroyer's bow, then dive beneath her keel before impact. If the torpedoes missed, the destroyer would drop depth charges directly on your position. If you dove too late, the destroyer would ram you. The margin for error was measured in seconds. At 750 yards, Dealey fired 3 torpedoes, then immediately ordered, "Take her down! 300 feet!" Harder's bow dropped at a 30-degree angle. The diving officer worked his controls with practiced precision, turning potential energy into life-saving depth. 40 seconds after firing, 2 explosions shook Harder so violently that light fixtures shattered throughout the boat. Then a third explosion, different from the first 2, lifted Harder's stern 6 feet before slamming it back down. Dealey ordered periscope depth. Where Minazuki had been, only debris and an oil slick remained. The destroyer had broken in half, her magazines detonating in a catastrophic secondary explosion. The other 2 destroyers were racing away, dropping depth charges randomly, their captains unwilling to close with a submarine that attacked rather than ran. Admiral Toyota received the news at 0900. His response was immediate and overwhelming. 6 more destroyers diverted from convoy duty to hunt 1 submarine. By noon, Japanese patrol planes were crisscrossing the area every 20 minutes. But Sam Dealey wasn't finished, not even close. June 7th, 0230, Harder surfaced to recharge batteries under a moonless sky. At 3:12, radar contact, single ship bearing 095, range 8,000 yards, closing at 28 knots. Definitely a destroyer. The contact was Hayanami, 1,700 tons, returning to base after 48 hours of fruitless submarine hunting. Her captain, Commander Kazuo Wakabayashi, was exhausted. His crew had been at battle stations for most of 2 days. Nobody expected an American submarine to attack on the surface at night. Dealey ordered flank speed. Harder's 4 diesel engines pushed the submarine to 21 knots, closing the range deliberately. At 4,000 yards, Hayanami's radar operator reported a small surface contact moving fast, probably another destroyer returning to base. At 3,000 yards, Wakabayashi realized his fatal error. He ordered flank speed and turned to ram, but physics and geometry were against him. At 2,300 yards, Dealey fired 4 torpedoes. 2 struck Hayanami's starboard side near the aft magazine. The explosion tore the destroyer's stern completely off. The ship rolled 90 degrees, her propeller still spinning uselessly as she went under stern first. Wakabayashi and 187 sailors died. Harder submerged immediately. Patrol planes would arrive within minutes. 2 destroyers in 24 hours. The Imperial Japanese Navy was in shock. Admiral Toyota's fury was volcanic. He pulled 8 destroyers from vital convoy escort duty and organized them into hunter-killer groups with one mission: find and destroy the American submarine operating near Tawi-Tawi. Every destroyer captain received the same unequivocal orders: maximum aggression, no retreat, kill that submarine. On June 8th, Dealey took Harder south toward Saibutu Passage, the narrow strait between Tawi-Tawi and Borneo. Japanese destroyers patrolled it constantly. Dealey wanted to see how many he could sink before they figured out his tactics. At 1400, lookouts spotted 2 destroyers steaming in formation, Tanikaze and an unidentified escort. Both were conducting standard search patterns, zigzagging predictably. Dealey studied their movements for 90 minutes, timing their turns, calculating their patterns. Every 8 minutes, they changed course. That gave him maybe 30 seconds to set up a shot after each turn. He positioned Harder directly in their projected path and waited. At 16:30, Tanakaze turned toward Harder's position. Range 3,000 yards. Dealey let her close. 2,500 yards. 2,000. 1,500. At 1,200 yards, he fired 4 torpedoes at 17-second intervals. The first torpedo missed ahead. The second struck Tanakaze near the bridge. The third hit the forward magazine. The explosion was so massive that Harder's crew heard it clearly through the hull. Tanakaze's bow section separated from the main hull. Both pieces sank within 3 minutes. The escort destroyer immediately charged Harder's position, dropping depth charges as she came. Dealey took Harder deep, 400 feet. The depth charges exploded overhead, violent concussions that made the submarine's hull ring like a bell, but caused no serious damage. After 40 minutes, the destroyer withdrew. 3 destroyers in 3 days. Admiral Toyota was about to make a decision that would alter the entire Pacific War. But first, Dealey had one more destroyer to sink, and this time he would do it in broad daylight with multiple witnesses. June 9th, 0500. Dealey brought Harder to periscope depth 12 miles southwest of Tawi-Tawi. What he saw made every man in the conning tower hold their breath. Dead ahead, 4 Japanese destroyers steaming in line formation, actively hunting. Their sonar was pinging so loudly that Harder's sound operator could hear it without headphones. Dealey had 8 torpedoes remaining. 4 destroyers meant he'd get maybe 2 shots before they overwhelmed him. He studied their formation through the periscope. The lead destroyer was zigzagging aggressively. The second was maintaining a steadier course. That was his target. At 0612, the second destroyer turned directly toward Harder. Range 4,000 yards. Dealey waited. At 1,800 yards, he fired 3 torpedoes. All 3 struck the destroyer's port side within 5 seconds. The ship exploded so violently that debris flew 300 feet into the air. She rolled over and sank in 90 seconds. The other 3 destroyers immediately converged on Harder's position. Dealey took her deep, 500 feet beyond her test depth. Depth charges began exploding overhead, 23 in the first 10 minutes. Lights shattered, emergency lighting kicked in, hull plates groaned under the pressure. A pipe burst in the forward torpedo room, spraying seawater. Harder's crew worked in disciplined silence, repairing damage, while depth charges continued their deadly drumbeat. After 2 hours, the destroyers withdrew. Dealey climbed to periscope depth. The ocean was empty. 4 enemy warships sunk in 4 days. But Dealey wasn't thinking about his unprecedented success. He was calculating fuel consumption. Harder had burned through 60% of her diesel reserves. 3 more days before they'd have to withdraw to Fremantle. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, commander of the Japanese Mobile Fleet at Tawi-Tawi, received the reports at 1400 on June 9th. 4 destroyers lost to 1 submarine. His anchorage, supposedly secure, was a killing ground. He sent an urgent message to Admiral Toyota. The Mobile Fleet needed to depart immediately. The Americans knew their location. Toyota agreed, but the decision carried enormous implications. Operation A-Go wasn't scheduled to begin until June 15th. Moving 6 days early meant arriving without proper reconnaissance, with destroyers scattered across multiple patrol zones with supply lines incomplete. But staying at Tawi-Tawi with an American submarine, methodically destroying his escorts, was suicide. On June 10th, at 0800, the Japanese mobile fleet departed Tawi-Tawi. 4 battleships, 9 carriers, 15 cruisers, 24 destroyers heading toward their destiny in the Philippine Sea. American codebreakers intercepted the movement orders within hours. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding the Fifth Fleet, adjusted his battle plans accordingly. The early departure gave American carriers an extra day to position themselves for what would become the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. That same day, at 0630, Dealey spotted 2 more destroyers patrolling north of Sibutu Passage. He had 5 torpedoes remaining, enough for 1 more attack. At 17:15, he fired 3 torpedoes at the lead destroyer. 1 struck near the bow. The destroyer slowed but didn't sink. The second destroyer immediately charged Harder's position. Dealey fired his last 2 torpedoes. Both missed. He had no weapons left, and a Japanese destroyer was bearing down at 32 knots. He ordered emergency deep. Harder's diving planes bit hard, pushing her down at maximum angle. The destroyer passed directly overhead, her propellers so loud that Harder's crew could hear individual blades through the pressure hull. For 90 minutes, the destroyer hunted Harder. 42 depth charges, most exploding too shallow or too far away, but 3 came close enough to crack gauge glass and spring minor leaks. Dealey kept Harder deep and silent, motors at bare minimum, making just enough way to maintain control. Finally, at 1900, the destroyer withdrew, her depth charge racks empty. Harder limped south toward Australia, arriving at Fremantle on June 21st. The moment she tied up, Admiral Lockwood was waiting on the pier. 5 destroyers attacked, 4 confirmed sunk, 1 damaged. The most successful anti-destroyer patrol in submarine warfare history. Lockwood awarded Dealey his 4th Navy Cross on the spot, then asked the question every aggressive commander wanted to hear. "Can you do it again?" Dealey's answer was immediate. "Give me torpedoes and I'll sink 10. The strategic impact of Harder's 4-day rampage extended far beyond 4 sunken destroyers. Admiral Ozawa's early departure from Tawi-Tawi meant the Japanese mobile fleet arrived at the Philippine Sea disorganized and unprepared. When American carrier aircraft found them on June 19th, Japanese carriers were still launching aircraft. Their combat air patrol was undermanned, their formation scattered across 200 miles of ocean. The result was catastrophic. American pilots shot down 376 Japanese aircraft while losing only 30. 3 Japanese carriers sank. The Imperial Japanese Navy lost 70% of its trained carrier pilots and would never recover. The battle that broke Japanese naval aviation happened partly because Sam Dealey had forced their fleet to move before it was ready. Dealey proved that submarines could hunt destroyers successfully by violating every assumption destroyer captains made about submarine behavior. When destroyers expected submarines to run, Harder charged. That unexpected aggression created hesitation, confusion, and fatal mistakes. By war's end, American submarines using Dealey's tactics had sunk 38 Japanese destroyers. On August 5th, Harder departed Fremantle for her 6th war patrol, operating with USS Harder and USS Harder as a wolf pack. On August 21st, they intercepted a 16-ship convoy, sinking 4 cargo vessels. On August 22nd, Harder sank 2 coastal defense vessels off Bataan. But Japanese intelligence had tracked the wolf pack's movements. On August 24th at 05:30, Harder crash-dived when 2 Japanese escorts appeared 2,000 yards away. CD-22's sonar operator had a perfect contact. At 05:47, the escort made her first depth charge run. The explosions bracketed Harder perfectly. Her pressure hull cracked. The stern flooded. At 0552, CD-22 made a second run. This pattern hit even closer. Harder's hull imploded at 600 feet. All 79 men died instantly. No survivors. The Japanese ships reported oil, debris, and cork insulation floating to the surface. They circled for 2 hours, dropping additional depth charges to ensure the submarine was destroyed. USS Harder, submerged nearby, could only watch and report Harder's loss. In March 1946, President Truman presented the Medal of Honor to Dealey's widow. The citation noted 5 vital Japanese destroyers sunk in 5 short-range torpedo attacks and praised Dealey's valiant fighting spirit. But awards couldn't capture what Harder had truly accomplished. Before Harder's 5th patrol, submarine doctrine emphasized stealth and evasion. Dealey proved that aggression worked better than hiding. His down-the-throat tactics revolutionized submarine warfare. By late 1944, every submarine commander in the Pacific had studied Harder's patrol reports. Between June and December 1944, American submarines sank 14 Japanese destroyers using variations of Dealey's aggressive tactics. In May 2024, the Lost 52 project discovered Harder's wreck in the South China Sea, sitting upright at 3,150 feet. Her pressure hull remains mostly intact, except for depth charge damage near the conning tower. She is a protected war grave, a memorial to 79 men who changed naval warfare forever. Today, submarine warfare instructors still teach the down-the-throat attack as a case study in aggressive tactics. Not because modern submarines use the same techniques, but because Dealey's approach demonstrates a timeless principle. When your enemy expects you to run, charging often works better than hiding. The 79 men aboard Harder came from 38 states. Farm boys from Iowa, factory workers from Michigan, college graduates from California. They volunteered for submarine duty knowing that 22% of submariners wouldn't survive the war. They knew the odds. They served anyway. Commander Samuel David Dealey rests in Arlington National Cemetery. His headstone reads simply, Medal of Honor, Destroyer Killer. But his true monument lies 3,750 feet beneath the South China Sea, where USS Harder and her crew proved that one submarine with one aggressive commander could change the course of history. These men deserve to be remembered not just for sinking destroyers, but for revolutionizing naval warfare through sheer audacity. When doctrine said run, they charged. When the odds said retreat, they attacked. And in 4 days in June 1944, they helped win the largest naval battle in history before it even began. That's the legacy of USS Harder, proof that sometimes the best defense isn't just a good offense. Sometimes it's an impossible one. Dawn on February 20th found Stein awake and ready. The assault on Suribachi proved brutal beyond imagination. For 5 more days, he fought up those volcanic slopes with his damaged Stinger, until a grenade on February 25th sent him to a hospital ship bleeding from multiple wounds that would have killed a lesser man. But Tony Stein couldn't stay away from his unit. The news from shore was devastating. Company A was being torn apart on Hill 362A, losing men he'd trained with, eaten with, laughed with. Against direct medical orders, he left the hospital ship on February 27th, commandeering passage on a landing craft returning to the beach. The Stinger was gone, destroyed, or lost in the chaos of continuous combat. He grabbed an M1 Garand from a supply dump and walked 6 miles through volcanic ash to rejoin his depleted platoon. On March 1st, 1945, Company A was tasked with a reconnaissance patrol to locate enemy pillboxes harassing the regiment's advance. 19 Marines, with Corporal Tony Stein as assistant patrol leader. Their mission: move forward 400 yards, identify enemy positions, return with intelligence. No assault, just reconnaissance. At 0700, the patrol moved out. The terrain was a moonscape of volcanic ridges and ravines, perfect for ambush. Japanese soldiers occupied spider holes and cave positions throughout the area, waiting with the patience of hunters. The patrol moved slowly, 20 yards, stop, observe, listen. Every Marine knew they were being watched. At 0745, they reached a ridgeline overlooking a small valley. Stein moved to the front, studying the terrain ahead through the morning haze. He could see what looked like camouflaged positions, possibly pillboxes, possibly cave entrances. The patrol needed to move closer. At 0752, a single rifle shot shattered the morning stillness. The bullet struck Tony Stein in the head. He dropped instantly, his body crumpling into the black volcanic ash he'd run across barefoot just 7 days earlier. The shot came from a concealed position 200 yards northeast, a spider hole so well camouflaged that even Stein's trained eye hadn't spotted it. Corpsmen reached him within seconds, but there was nothing to be done. Corporal Tony Stein, age 23, the toolmaker from Dayton, who had revolutionized infantry combat with salvaged aircraft parts, was dead. The patrol returned fire, called in mortars, saturated the area with high explosives. Whether they killed the sniper was never confirmed. On March 2nd, Stein was buried in the 5th Division Cemetery on Iwo Jima. A simple wooden cross marked his grave. Name, rank, serial number. No mention of the Stinger. No indication that here lay the man who had saved 9 lives in a single day of combat. The battle for Iwo Jima continued for 24 more days. When it ended, nearly 7,000 Americans were dead, 20,000 wounded. The Japanese lost over 20,000 men. But on February 19th, during those crucial first hours, Tony Stein and his improvised weapon had made the difference between advance and bloody repulse. On February 19, 1946, exactly 1 year after his barefoot runs, Joan Stein received her husband's Medal of Honor at the Ohio State House. The citation mentioned his personally improvised aircraft-type weapon, but didn't call it the Stinger. That name lived only in Marine memories. The 6 Stingers built by Stein and Grevich all saw combat on Iwo Jima. 2 were destroyed by enemy fire, 1 jammed permanently from overheating, 2 survived, but were lost in post-war equipment disposal. None exist today. They were field modifications, non-standard weapons that embarrassed ordnance officers and thrilled combat Marines. In December 1948, Tony Stein's body was returned to Dayton for burial with full military honors. He rests in Calvary Cemetery, the only Medal of Honor recipient from Dayton in World War II. Veterans still leave coins on his grave, pennies from privates, quarters from NCOs who understand what it means to modify equipment to save lives. The Marine Corps never officially adopted the Stinger design, but Stein's innovation influenced post-war weapon development. The M60 machine gun, introduced in 1957, incorporated lessons learned from Marines who needed portable, high-volume firepower. Modern squad automatic weapons trace their conceptual lineage to a toolmaker who looked at an aircraft gun and saw infantry possibilities. Today, at Parris Island, drill instructors still tell Boots about the barefoot corporal, not because they want Marines running barefoot, they don't, but because Tony Stein embodied the Corps' deepest values. Improvise, adapt, overcome. When standard equipment fails, build better. When wounded, keep fighting. When ordered to rest, return to your unit. The boy from Dayton who dropped out of high school to work machines had built a weapon that sang death at 200 rounds per minute. He'd run barefoot through hell to keep it fed. He'd saved 9 lives and destroyed over 20 enemy positions. And when his war ended with a sniper's bullet on a volcanic ridge, he was still moving forward, still leading from the front, still trying to protect his brothers. That's why Marines remember Tony Stein, not just for the Medal of Honor, or the enemy killed, or the positions destroyed. They remember him because when everything went wrong, when the weapons were inadequate, when the boots fell apart, when the ammunition ran low, he found a way to keep his people alive and moving forward. The Stinger was more than an improvised weapon. It was proof that one determined man with mechanical knowledge and unlimited courage could change the course of a battle. And Tony Stein was more than a barefoot corporal. He was the embodiment of every Marine who ever looked at an impossible situation and decided to attack anyway.